Have you ever wondered who your inner child actually is? What does it mean to have an inner child? My 25th thesis statement is that at the core of every human being exists neural wiring of childhood versions of themselves. The second way that this implicit memory data from early neurodevelopment affects our inner child is through action patterns or innate movement programs. Implicit procedural memories carry a few different kinds of pieces of information, including learned motor skills, so being able to ride a bike or play an instrument. All of that is stored in implicit procedural memory data. Even deeper within the unconsciousness, though, implicit procedural memories carry action patterns or innate movement programs, and these are all about approach and avoidance tendencies and survival responses. And this implicit wiring affects 80% or more of decision-making tendencies and abilities unconsciously. So as we navigate our life, how we make choices primarily stems from implicit procedural memories, existing and operating far beyond what we can consciously get to within our mind. Implicit emotional memories carry a relationship with attachment well-being. Moments of attachment need fulfillment create enjoyable sensations projected from implicit emotional memories, while moments of unfulfilled attachment needs create unpleasant emotional sensations projected from this memory data. Similarly, implicit procedural memories have a specific relationship with attachment systems. How our unconscious body-mind learns to navigate life, decision-making tendencies, abilities. Where do you go? Where do you avoid? What do you approach? What do you step away from? Who do you trust? Who do you protect yourself from? What do you take risks on? And what do you, back away from and kind of have some boundaries with? All of that information comes from how experience sculpts implicit procedural memory data in relation to attachment well-being. And so when there's something that fulfills attachment needs, the unconscious body-mind learns to approach it. When something does not fulfill attachment needs, the unconscious body-mind learns to avoid it. And then the unconscious body-mind creates other action patterns in relation to kind of figuring out how to strive to meet attachment needs and how to survive when they're not being met. And then the unconscious body-mind also carries different kinds of responses regarding moments of severely unfulfilled attachment needs, like pulling away or contracting muscularly. For example, if someone doesn't like to be hugged, it might be because the unconscious body-mind doesn't feel safe to be touched and embraced because of past moments that sculpted procedural memory data. And so when someone reaches in to hug them, they avoid that and have a survival response of muscular contraction. That experience directly stems from implicit procedural memory data sculpted in relation to attachment well-being from past moments of experience. So that's kind of the general insight about implicit procedural memories. But here's where stuff gets super dicey and super fun and super wild and super wacky and super cool to explore. Even when we are in later years of adulthood, action patterns from childhood are still projecting information into subconscious realities of our inner child. While our adult self is experiencing more recent neural intel from adulthood, our inner child, deeper within our subconscious realms, is experiencing neural data from childhood. So the way we go about making decisions from adulthood might be different from the way we go about making decisions from childhood. For example, when you're a child, you might eat anything sweet that you find just because you can and it's yummy and it's there. As an adult, you might have different action patterns in your implicit procedural memory data. You might look at a box of cookies and think, okay, I think I'm going to not eat those cookies right now. I've been trying to watch my sugar intake. I've been working out and kind of been trying to get on this healthier trail. And so I'm going to just decide to not approach those cookies. I'm going to avoid eating that sugar right now. But those action patterns are probably different from the action patterns experienced as a child. As a child, you see a box of cookies and you're like, it's a box of cookies. Not speaking from experience, I did not love cookies as a child at all. So our action patterns are different from childhood and adulthood because we're growing, we're developing, we're evolving, we're learning new ways of being, we're expanding in our ability to consciously choose who we are and how we navigate our unfoldings. As a child, you see a box of cookies, you're not worried about your sugar intake. You're not worried about whether you've been exercising enough or you need to burn off the calories. You're 5, 6, 7 years old. You see a box of cookies. You're going to eat the box of cookies. And that action pattern may or may not be different from when you're an adult. This is just, of course, one of infinite examples. But the action patterns we experience are often different during adulthood than they are during childhood. Regardless of the differences of implicit procedural memory data in relation to how our adult is experiencing more recent intel in our now, and how our inner child is experiencing past intel sculpted during early neurodevelopment, no matter how many years are in between these realities, no matter how many similarities or differences are between these worlds, the inner child is constantly experiencing energetic information from implicit procedural memory data sculpted during childhood. So even when the adult self, in this one silly example of eating cookies, even when the adult self is up here and says, I'm going to say no to those cookies. I don't need any more sugar right now. I'm respectfully saying no, it looks good, but I'm choosing to avoid that sugar intake. Even in that moment, the inner child is over here experiencing energetic information about approaching eating the cookies. And so there's different styles of subconscious realities always occurring. The manifestations of them may be different for different people along different walks of life, and the intensities of it might be different. For example, if the adult self has complete connectivity with the inner child, then reality might be this one smoothly flowing, fluid experience, while someone living with adaptable consciousness condition might experience the adult self and the inner child as completely independent states of consciousness or autonomous inner persons. So manifestations of these realities are infinite in their potentials, but our inner child is constantly experiencing action patterns or innate movement programs regarding approach avoidance tendencies and survival responses affecting decision-making tendencies and abilities. Our inner child is experiencing that information in relation to the neural wiring sculpted during early neurodevelopment or early childhood, especially the first 15 years of life. There's a few fascinating features of this topic that are worth exploring. First is that we cannot directly identify the activation of implicit procedural memory data. And so we're moving through our life, we're making choices big and small in every nanosecond. Do I walk this way? Do I walk this way? Do I open this door? Do I open this door? Do I go here? Do I go there? Do I choose this? Do I choose that? Do I take the back roads? Do I take the highway? Etc., etc. Do I let my cat out? Do I leave my cat in? Do I feed the cat now? Do I feed the cat tonight? There's a million choices in our everyday lives, big and small, and how we navigate those directly depends on the status of implicit procedural memory data, the content and the connectivity, as past experiences in relation to attachment well-being have sculpted this foundation of our unconscious body-mind. When we think about decision making, we usually think about external realities, like choosing what food to eat, or choosing what road to drive on, or choosing what words to say when communicating with another human being. We think about the outer realities, typically, when we think about decision making. But there's actually internal decisions as well, and those also directly derive from procedural memories existing and operating beyond all awareness. A really important element of this is visual eyesight. Where and how our eyes automatically focus their perceptual reality directly stems from activity of unconscious memory systems, as procedural memories automatically dictate 80% or more of decision making. Where and how the eyes are focusing their gaze instinctively reveals clues about implicit wiring, including procedural memories. For example, when you see someone walking past, do you avoid looking at them? Do you focus on them, maybe with a sense of paranoia or curiosity, and you wonder who they are, what they're doing, especially in relation to you? Or are you softly focusing your gaze on whatever it is that you're doing, and you don't care about that person in the backdrop of your experience? That is one of infinite examples about how procedural memories affect internal decision making, such as where and how the eyes are instinctively focusing their visual gaze. While driving, do eyes instinctively zone out on the road ahead of you? Do eyes instinctively kind of shift their gaze, kind of looking at all the other cars and all the other drivers, maybe with a sense of nervousness? Or are eyes kind of looking around at the nature and noticing the clouds and noticing the birds and noticing the trees while you're driving? Little things like that provide clues about what's happening within the implicit wiring of our neurobiological applications of consciousness. It's interesting to think that our eyeballs have their own processes of decision-making tendencies and abilities, as that aspect of our internal experience is miraculously linking worlds with implicit memory data. It's all a beautiful miracle worthy of loving exploration. Specifically, we can explore what the eyes approach, avoid, or have a survival-based reaction to. When you see something, do your eyes connect with that and approach that element of experience? Do the eyes look away and avoid that element of experience? Or is there some kind of instinctive bodily reaction upon seeing that visual stimulus? For example, if you see a dog walk past, do you look at the dog and have a feeling of happiness? Do you look at the dog and have a feeling of tension? Do you look away from the dog and you have a sense of nervousness or frozenness? Do you look away from the dog and redirect yourself towards the beautiful bird flying overhead? Or do you look at the dog and suddenly your whole body goes tense and stiff and you can't feel like you can't move and you feel like your heart is racing, but you also can't even move and you don't even know what's happening? All of those are different clues about implicit wiring because of how and where the eyes are looking, what they're looking at, and how they're emotionally seeing it, basically, or how they're energetically perceiving and responding to that element of visual experience. The more we can attune to these hidden subconscious realities, the more we can be there for parts of ourselves who are experiencing personal life beyond direct perception of our conscious awareness. Because remember, approximately 99.08% of our inner beings are encountering realities beyond the direct perception of what we can get to in our conscious mind. Meaning that subconscious parts are experiencing all kinds of hidden realities, while our conscious mind is up here in a small fraction of what's actually happening in the entirety of our inner beings. As we consciously connect to how our eyes are instinctively encountering experience, the more our conscious mind can attune to subconscious clues to connect with those aspects of consciousness. So the first step here is just to observe automatic realities of the eyes. You don't have to interject or shift or change anything, but simply bringing awareness and observing how eyes are participating in experience can help the conscious mind connect with subconscious parts and learn about the neurobiological wiring automatically impacting experience. A little healing journey tip, trick, and tool. As the conscious awareness continues practicing loving presence with the inner experiencer, observing how and where the eyes automatically focus. That's kind of the first step, and you're just kind of in a learning phase of understanding what's already happening within you. Once that becomes a regular practice, the observational self within the conscious mind can practice embodying personal power by intentionally, mindfully, and consciously choosing how and where the eyes are focused throughout unfolding moments. A lot of life kind of happens automatically, and you're just flowing through and you're just doing the things you're doing. But the more that there can be conscious presence and mindful intentionality, the more power consciousness reclaims within itself, and then has that power to influence internal wiring and external elements of experience while navigating them both. Every time the power of consciousness mindfully chooses how and where the eyes are focusing their gaze throughout unfolding moments, power is being reclaimed as consciousness comes together in a fresh way and influences the energetic wiring of internal structures. One of the most powerful ways to practice this is focusing the visual eyes on the hands or the fingertips with an intention of lovingly connecting with the inner experiencer. Obviously, this can't be practiced 24/7, but this practice may be applied in everyday moments, such as when you're unloading the dishwasher, doing yoga, eating, driving, etc. When you're showering, when you're taking care of yourself, when you're doing the chores, when you're moving from point A to point B while you're working and kind of in between things. There's lots of times that this can be practiced in everyday life. And so basically the observational self takes its stance as conscious presence in the eyes and then chooses to focus the gaze on the hands and connect with aspects of consciousness who are within experience. An attention shifted to presence with your own being, an intention of loving self-connection and grounded presence in the moment. And this way of practicing loving presence through intentional focus of the eyes can actually gradually retrain implicit procedural memory data to approach loving presence with your own self and your own experience, and to avoid anything that might disrupt your own loving presence with yourself and within experience. And this practice can also gradually help transmute any survival responses that might be activated. If there's stress responses where little things can feel overwhelming or daunting or anything like that, this practice can gradually help improve the content and connectivity of neural wiring so things don't cause those kinds of internal responses. For example, if unloading the dishwasher is anxiety provoking, just as one of infinite examples here, if approaching the dishwasher is intimidating or daunting because there's so much anxiety and stress going on, just moving through a step-by-step process feels overwhelming. Okay, again, this is just one of infinite examples. But as you're doing that, instead of approaching the dishwasher, approach yourself while moving to the dishwasher. Okay, so in this example, your eyes are on the dishwasher and you're feeling a sense of overwhelm. okay? In this moment, stimulus of external experience is activating internal data to create a certain style of automated experience, okay? So while you're approaching the dishwasher, the inner being is like, oh no, we're approaching the activation of this neural data that feels scary, okay? That's kind of what's happening beyond awareness. So as you're approaching this element of experience, instead of focusing on the experience, focus on your inner experiencer. Instead of approaching the dishwasher, approach yourself while moving to the dishwasher. Okay, so instead of your eyes just being in the dishwasher, you might have your hands right above your face while you walk to the dishwasher, and you're focusing on connecting with your hands visually, while you're focusing on lovingly connecting with your own presence, with your inner experiencer. Okay, so with your body, your eyes are focused on your hand, but through the power of your consciousness, your observational self is focused on connecting with your inner experiencer, or your experiential self, or your subconscious parts, or your parts of consciousness, or aspects of self-essence, however you want to phrase it. So instead of just approaching the dishwasher, you approach yourself while moving towards the dishwasher. Okay, and then as you move through each moment, you're not trying to get a task done. Okay, when we focus on experience exclusively, we lose our power because we're trying to gain connection externally when it really needs to happen internally. So instead of I am unloading the dishwasher, it's I am spending time with my consciousness while all aspects of me collaborate to unload the dishwasher. Okay, it's very subtle, but so powerful. And again, this can be applied in any kind of situation. While you're driving, it's not I'm driving to XYZ, it's I am spending time connecting with my aspects of consciousness while all parts of me collaboratively drive to this destination. The entire experience changes. Consciousness unites, and implicit neural data is actually covertly and gradually transformed to improve health within the unconscious body-mind. So as subtle as it is, it's so powerful. And practicing it every day creates infinite power for any type of healing journey through life. Whether you're trying to increase your confidence to move towards more goals, or whether you're trying to transform years of severe traumatic stress, or anything in between. This kind of practice can amplify internal power to a profound degree. So then while you're moving through the experience, you're not just you moving through experience, you're you connecting with you while collaboratively moving through experience. So as you unload the dishwasher, you're not connecting with the dishes, you're connecting with your hand that is picking up the dishes. Okay, and you see how subtle that is? So subtle. The eyes would normally automatically be, I'm looking at the dishwasher, I'm looking at the dishes, I'm looking at the drawer that I'm opening to put the silverware away, I'm looking at the cupboard that I'm putting the bowls away. But in this practice, instead, you're focusing on your hands that are picking up the dish and stacking the dish, and picking up the other plate and stacking that plate, and picking up the other plate and stacking that plate. And in this process, your observational self is taking its stance as conscious presence through visual eyesight, while lovingly connecting with parts of consciousness who are directly within experience by focusing on your hands. Okay? You're building attachments with your own self essence, cultivating loving presence to cultivate personal power. And in this process, procedural memory data improves its content and connectivity because you're learning to approach your own loving presence, which is really the ideal state of our neurobiological structures. When we have neural data that supports loving connection and grounded presence, our unconscious body-mind is able to thrive in great expanses. So we have improved decision-making abilities and tendencies. So we have more positive internal emotional sensations. So our memory improves, and our ability to access short and long-term memory through conscious intentionality is actually improved, and we can get there a little easier and have more power within the abilities of our memories, etc., etc. There's a lot of positive health benefits to this practice. So procedural memories affect decision making, but that's not just external motions, it's also internal elements. And a powerful example is how and where visual eyesight is focused. And the more conscious power can grab that ability intentionally and choose where and how. It's important that it's both of that, where and how, where you're looking and how you're shifting that aspect of experience. The more that the power of conscious presence can choose that intentionally, manually, and mindfully, the more power is actually reclaimed within implicit wiring that's always impacting us, even though we can't directly perceive that. So we cannot directly perceive the activation of an implicit procedural memory. So while we're moving through our life, we're making all of these choices. And there's the potential for the data to be coming from early stages of neurodevelopment and impacting our unfolding realities. And this isn't good or bad or anything like that. It's simply something to be aware of. Expanding our awareness amplifies our personal power, and it helps us to be there for ourselves. Because if we have a certain way of making a decision, or if a certain style of decision is anxiety provoking, for example, if that implicit procedural memory data affecting that aspect of our navigation comes from early childhood, then it's giving us a clue of consciousness about how our inner child is doing or what our inner child might be experiencing. If we're up here as a present day adult self, but we're feeling anxious about making a decision, like maybe you're sitting at a restaurant and you have to decide which meal to get, and you don't understand why, but you're feeling anxious about which to choose. You feel like you might make a wrong choice somehow, and it's giving you anxiety, and you're looking at the menu and you're reading it and you're analyzing which one is the right meal to get, and you're like, this is ridiculous. I'm picking food at a restaurant. What's happening right now? As minor of a situation as that might be, it's a clue about what's happening in the unconscious body mind. The ability to navigate that moment and make a decision depends on implicit procedural memory data. And if in that moment, neurobiological applications of consciousness are pulling its data from the foundations, or anything grown from the foundation that's affected by the foundation, basically, then it kind of shows us what's happening beneath the surface. There might be an aspect of our inner child who's experiencing implicit procedural memory data where they don't feel safe to make a choice for themselves, or they don't feel respected enough to trust their own ability to choose for themselves, or they feel like they will be unsafe if they make a mistake, etc., etc., etc. So as seemingly small, subtle, and minor as a situation like that might be, where you're having a hard time choosing a meal when you're sitting at a restaurant, it's an opportunity to explore the hidden realities of the unconscious body mind. What if there's an aspect of the inner child who doesn't feel safe to freely choose for themselves, or like they can't trust their own ability to choose, etc., etc.? And so there's this potential for implicit procedural memory data from early childhood sculpted in relation with attachment well-being to impact our unfoldings beyond direct perception and immediate awareness, whether it's the direct data from that or data that developed and was stored on top of that. For example, data from age 20 that is stored in relation to data from age 5 because of how early neurodevelopment sculpts the foundation of our neurobiological applications of consciousness. So regardless of where it's pulling its data from directly, it always stems back to our inner child, because our inner child is experiencing neural projections that create the foundation from which all neural data develops through our entire lives. So moments of unfulfilled attachment needs needs during early childhood are going to affect implicit procedural memory data storage, which affects our decision-making tendencies and abilities. And then all of the rest of our lives are creating energetic information that's stored in relation to that, and attachment well-being in the unfoldings as well. It's helpful to understand that implicit procedural memory data is being activated in every nanosecond and impacting our lives, impacting how we perceive ourselves, impacting how our sense of self navigates unfoldings, etc. But we do not consciously, within our immediate awareness, have a sense of those hidden realities. We cannot directly consciously identify the activation of an implicit procedural memory. You don't open a kitchen cupboard and you're like, oh, I'm noticing a whole bunch of activations. There's these implicit procedural memories that are being activated and suggesting what I should choose from this cupboard. That's not how our conscious mind experiences things. You know, later on, once we learn about stuff, maybe we create that narration in our mind consciously or something, but instinctively, our conscious awareness does not have an ability to understand what's happening in our implicit memories. And implicit procedural memories, sculpted during early childhood, are constantly being experienced by our inner child. And this impacts everything, okay? When you're walking down a street, how do you know what to approach, what to avoid, and what to have a survival-based reaction to? Okay, so let's have a few different examples here, and we'll just explore this conceptually, okay? So there's someone walking down a street, and they've had just thriving attachment systems their whole life, and they just kind of approach everything because everything's just safe and fun and loving, right? And they're just walking down the street, just like life is peachy keen, everything is utopia, and they're saying hi to all their neighbors, they're saying hi to the bugs, they're saying hi to the plants, they're saying hi to the mailboxes. There's a newspaper in the street, they gently pick it up and put it in the driveway because why not? Everything is love. So they kind of just approach everything in relation to how their implicit procedural memories are navigating their unfoldings of reality, their identity, and how identity is interacting with experience. Okay, then there's another person, and they walk along the street, and they've got their eyes to the ground the whole time. They're not even just like not approaching things, but they're avoiding acknowledging anything and everything around them. They don't even look up to see the sky. They don't even look up to see what neighbors might be around. They don't even look up to notice the flowers on the plants. They're avoiding everything. Okay? And that style of personal experience is being profoundly impacted by the unconscious activation of implicit procedural memories. They might have learned to avoid their surrounding reality because that helps them stay safe. Past experiences sculpted the neural wiring, and that's how they're navigating their nows. Then there's another person, and they're like kind of in between those two extremes, and they're walking and they're focused on where they're walking, but they'll occasionally wave to somebody. They won't strike up a conversation, but they'll kind of wave and glance to them. Whereas that first person is like going up to people like, hi, how are you? Just approaching everyone in every way. Okay, then there's a fourth person, and they're walking, and every time something flies by them, there might be a ladybug or a bee or a bird. Every time there's a new piece of stimulus as something flies past them, they suddenly crumple to the ground. Their spine curls in, their shoulder curls in, their neck extends out and down, and their arms go up. And they stay there for a few moments, and then they slowly get up and they try to keep walking. And then every time something else flies in, it happens again. In those moments, they are not consciously choosing that physical response. And this is really important to understand along any type of healing journey through life, especially for any beautiful, beloved soul friends along a great expansion of love or trauma recovery. Those reactions are the activation of implicit procedural memory data carrying a survival response. So in those moments, there's a vibrational signal, a piece of stimulus that comes in. And because it was something that was suddenly flying fast, it was just this sudden thing that came in, it activated the procedural memory data that's explaining how to navigate life and make choices. And it's affecting all the different ways that decisions are made. 80% or more of decision making comes from this neural wiring. And that was activated, and then the survival response took over and made decisions for them and affected their muscular posture and everything in between. And this person continues to walk along this path, and someone approaches them and says hello. In that moment, this fourth person in these examples immediately turns around and runs away as fast as they can. In that moment, the majority of how a decision was made came from implicit procedural memory data, not a conscious choice. And this isn't to say that we don't have a conscious choice, but more of our decisions come from neural wiring than come from our conscious presence until we are aware of it. Okay, this is the important part. While we're moving unconsciously through life or automatically through life, the implicit procedural memory data is going to make decisions for us. Once we expand our conscious presence, we have the power to make our own decisions and rewire that data. But until we have that level of conscious presence, which might take some time to cultivate, especially when struggling with chronic prefrontal cortex disengagement, unconscious stress responses, or independent neural activity. Until we have enough conscious power to override neural automations, the majority of navigation is coming from that procedural memory data. So it's just helpful to keep these hidden realities in mind. In that moment, in this example, when someone walked up to this person and they immediately turned around and ran away, that person was not there like, okay, I'm going to turn around and run away. Instead, there was this vibrational signal of seeing this person approach them and say hello, and that activated implicit procedural memory data sculpted during past moments of unfulfilled attachment needs, and it carried an innate movement program or action pattern regarding a flight stress response. And suddenly their nervous systems are dysregulated, their prefrontal cortex shut down, all kinds of different brain body things are happening, and the implicit procedural memory data says turn and run. But it doesn't say that, it just does it because it's in the body, okay? But if you could go into the body and listen to it or see it or whatever, that's what it would be. It would be this little gnome inside of the neural wiring, and he's like, turn and run! But that is how this person is experiencing automatic action patterns. So these are 4 examples of how implicit procedural memory data can affect someone walking down a street as one of infinite examples. So taking this concept and going back to our inner child learned how and what to approach and avoid. And oftentimes, we as the present-day adult self are not fully attuned with these realities. Life was very different as a child. The sense of identity had not yet developed. As it developed, it was thoroughly dependent on experience, including caregivers. So some children might not have a sense of identity independently of their family, as one example. This is perfectly normal because the development of our brain-body systems is directly dependent on attachment needs or attachment systems or attachment development. And attachment well-being begins through parent-child bonding. So originally, the child is attached to the family or the caregiver or the parents. And then particulars of that relationship, how family or parents or caregivers are providing for the attachment well-being of this child, that relationship, those interactions, those experiences are creating pieces of energetic information that are affecting the sculpting of implicit procedural memories. There are both direct and indirect lessons learned during these stages of growth. For example, parents might explain, you don't talk to strangers. You do not approach somebody that you do not know. Okay? And then that information is processed and stored in implicit procedural memory data. So when you're a child and you're walking and you see a stranger, you know to avoid them. Okay? Then there's indirect lessons, or lessons that are learned through experience rather than direct teachings. For example, if you burn your hand on a stove, then your body learns to avoid putting its skin to the stove top. And anytime you're around a stove, you check to make sure that it's not hot before moving your hand in that vicinity. So there's direct and indirect lessons that are learned regarding how the implicit procedural memories of our unconscious body-mind is gathering energetic information. Every year of neurodevelopment is contributing to the sculpting of this wiring, and there are lessons learned about what and how to approach and avoid regarding everything. People, places, food, exercise, books, movies. There's so many different aspects of experience, and our inner child learned how to navigate life as experience, sculpted procedural memory data, and explain to the unconscious body-mind what to approach and what to avoid, or how to navigate various elements of decision-making tendencies and abilities. For example, if you really love to sing as a child, and you're a child and you're singing all over the place. You're singing while you clean, you're singing while you work, you're singing while you're in the shower, you're singing while you're walking, you're singing on the bus, you're singing on the playground, you're singing everywhere. You're a child and you love to sing. But then these kids at the playground are like, oh, you sound awful. You should just never sing again. And then you're singing at home, and a family member says, would you mind keeping it down a little bit? And things like this continue to happen. The unconscious body-mind will learn to avoid singing. Even though the child loves to sing, the unconscious body-mind has learned that it's better not to sing, and will create implicit procedural memory data explaining to avoid singing at all on the playground, to learn to sing very quietly when you're at home, etc. From music you listen to, movies you watch, clothing styles that you wear, ways of expressing yourself, ways of decorating your room. There's so many different features to experience, and our inner child has learned how to navigate life and approach and avoid things based on the experiences that sculpted content and connectivity of implicit procedural memory data. And the profound aspect of this is that even one experience can create procedural memory data that impacts future moments. So let's say 15 years of life sculpts the foundation of the neurobiological applications of consciousness, okay? There's so much energetic information here within the implicit procedural memories affecting decision-making beyond awareness. Even 1 hour of one day of that 15 years can create enough implicit procedural memory information to affect our decisions decades later. That is so profound. 1 hour of one day in this 15 years of experience has the power to create enough energetic information in procedural memory data to impact a decision decades later. Keeping these hidden subconscious realities in mind profoundly expands personal power along any type of healing journey through life, especially as we connect with hidden inner realities of our inner child. Because while we're up here as our adult self moving through whatever our life looks like now, our inner child is still here in the deepest layer of our unconscious body mind, experiencing that energetic information beyond our direct perception and immediate awareness. So implicit procedural memories carrying action patterns, which involve approach and avoidance tendencies and survival responses, that information is affecting how our inner child experiences themselves and life. And remember, there's so many different aspects of our consciousness who are here within our inner child. And until we link worlds with them, we as the present day adult self will not feel able to connect with the expansive wholeness of all that we are. We might not even realize that though, because we're used to operating as we are. It's only once you see the potential of the wholeness you can feel that you realize how much of you is missing. You're up here existing and operating. This is just life. It's normal. It's just the way things are. It's the way things have been. How can you possibly know an alternate potential of how full and wondrous life could be if all of you was there to experience it? If you were fully connected with all aspects of your inner child. So it's important to keep this in mind because our inner child is a significant portion of who we are. But they're not experiencing life as we are up here. They're experiencing life in relation to the neural wiring sculpted during the first decade and a half or so of life. And this includes implicit memory data, housing different kinds of emotions and different types of action patterns. I had a profound opportunity to experience this independent activation while living with adaptable consciousness condition. I would experience states of consciousness who exclusively encountered life as and through the lens of the inner child, without any access to neural content from adulthood. During these times, all elements of decision-making tendencies and abilities directly stemmed from the procedural memory data sculpted during early childhood. And now that I'm here as my fully grounded present-day adult self with connectivity to all aspects of my inner child, I can see the difference between my neurobiological activity now and then, and it is profound. But the even more profound aspect of that is that all of that data is still there. It's impacting life differently because it's no longer engaging independently within my neurobiological applications of consciousness, but all of the data is still there. And I was able to learn so much about how our inner child experiences themselves and life. While we're up here as our adult self, they are deep within us, and they're still experiencing all of the action patterns from childhood. How your 5-year-old self learned how to approach or avoid things at home or at school or at a friend's house or at the library. That information is still impacting hidden realities of your inner child. How your 12-year-old self learned how to navigate choices while shopping at a store or while spending time with family or while being around other people or while engaging in a new setting. Those decision-making tendencies and abilities or approach avoidance tendencies and different automated responses and reactions are still affecting those aspects of your inner child beyond direct perception and immediate awareness. And even though this reality is occurring unconsciously, it is still occurring within us. So on some level, in some capacity, in one way or another, it is impacting us in our now moments. We just might not have direct perception and immediate awareness of what's happening or what's causing it, why it's happening. But a lot of it can often be traced back to hidden realities of our inner child. When implicit procedural memories engage action patterns from early childhood, it presents a profound opportunity for the present-day adult self to lovingly bridge worlds and connect with the inner child, reaching from the first subconscious layer closest with the mind into the third subconscious layer closest with the body, or reaching in from more recent data within the neurobiological social engagement system all the way into the great depths of the foundation of the neurobiological social engagement system as the adult self connects with the inner child in present unfoldings. Without this conscious and mindful internal self-connection, the inner child might engage independently, causing self-essence to be unable to completely connect within itself and increasing the likelihood of implicit procedural memory data to unconsciously dictate unfolding choices or decision making. While continuously expanding conscious awareness and presence throughout unfolding moments along your healing journey through life, you might start to recognize certain action patterns or approach avoidance tendencies or ways that you go about making choices, big or small. You might start to recognize those energies as stemming from childhood. You might start to recognize that certain action patterns are ways that started within your being many years ago, where the way that you move about everyday moments or certain avenues of choices stems from your inner child or from neural data from when you were young, where experiences sculpted the foundation of your brain-body system, and then all other experiences were processed in relation to that. So even though you're up here making a choice here, you might start to recognize that the way you go about making those choices has been happening for a long time, basically. As you start to notice that, you're consciously connecting with your inner child simply by bringing awareness to this occurrence. As you start to recognize this, the adult self could connect with the inner child by moving about those action patterns with conscious presence. So instead of the inner child automatically experiencing that neural activity, the adult self interjects conscious presence and is then there with the inner child and has influence over the automated neural activity. For example, if the inner child experiences action patterns about approaching sugary foods, then seeing candy or cookies or other sweet treats might activate that neural data and project implicit procedural memory data with action patterns into their subconscious realities. If the body automatically approaches those sugary food and instinctively eats it, the inner child might be independently experiencing that moment without full connectivity to the adult self. But if the adult self mindfully interjects and says, I am eating this cookie with my inner child, and uses the automated action pattern as a catalyst for internal self-connection, then there can be healing within those moments. You don't even necessarily need to try and change the action pattern right away, but it can be used as a catalyst for internal self-connection, because then the inner child is not just automatically experiencing these procedural memories with unconscious action patterns. Instead, there's conscious presence within the experience, and the adult self is connecting with the inner child. So two things are happening here. The prefrontal cortex in the brain, where personal power of consciousness dominantly resides, is interjecting its power and connecting with unconscious activity of procedural memory data coming from deeper regions of the unconsciousness. So there's healing happening in the brain-body system by interjecting loving presence in this experience, conscious presence in these moments. The second thing that's happening is aspects of self-essence are connecting and coming home to each other in the present moment as the present day adult self connects with the inner child. So it's creating healing for neurobiological applications and consciousness. So they're two distinct essences, but they're always interacting. And so by interjecting conscious presence and having the adult self connect with the inner child, using the instinctive action pattern as a catalyst, it's this opportunity to rise up into personal power. And then the more this happens, the more power consciousness will have to override automated neural activations. And so then if you want to not approach sugary foods in this one example of infinite potentials, then the power of consciousness has more opportunity to make an intentional choice rather than being subjected to automated neural projections. This may arise in an infinite myriad of ways. Eating is just one example of how this neurobiological activity is impacting consciousness and how consciousness can impact neurobiological activity. Another example in the realms of eating. If there have been chronic action patterns of binge eating stemming back to a stage of early neurodevelopment, whether that's 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, then the present day adult self can start to reclaim power by establishing loving presence with the inner child who is within the automated action patterns. Okay, so binge eating might develop because of other unfulfilled attachment needs. But the action patterns are so deeply ingrained in the procedural memory data that the individual might not be able to just automatically choose to not binge eat. Because in this experience, there might be unconscious activation of a stress response where the prefrontal cortex is disengaged and procedural memories are creating all decision making in the moments. And so there is the potential that the individual doesn't have the neurobiological ability in those moments to choose not to binge eat. And it can feel like a very powerless space to be in. And so one way that consciousness can start to reclaim its personal power in these types of experiences is by establishing loving connection with the inner experiencer, the observational self connecting with the experiential self, and or the adult self connecting with the inner child. And so then consciousness is coming together while experiencing the automations of neural activity. Then it's not the inner child binge eating because they don't have a choice in the moment. Instead, it's the adult self being present with the inner child while the brain-body system projects automated styles of personal experience. Consciousness is coming together, and the more that it establishes loving presence within itself in the moment, the more power it will gradually reclaim to rewire neurobiological structures to transmute personal experience in any way that it desires. So while binge eating might not be able to be something that can be automatically changed, consciousness has power by connecting with itself who is within the experience. Rather than the experiential self being helplessly subjected to automated styles of sensations, action patterns, and experience, the observational self, or the adult self in the present day, lovingly connects with the aspects of self who are within the experience. If these action patterns have been happening since childhood, then they're connecting with the inner child. And then they're together while this automated unconscious activity is occurring. And then practicing this every day, or every time this automated habit comes up, every time there's an impulse for binge eating, eventually It might take some time. It might take weeks. It might take months. It might take years. We don't look at the time frame when we're healing. It's irrelevant. You're here and now in each new present moment reclaiming power. That is the only place to put focus in. We don't look at the potential time frame. We just look at the power we have in this moment, because that power is infinite. The power we have in each individual moment is infinite. No matter how it feels, this is the truth that is strong enough to conquer any other illusion of a supposed truth. So there might not be an ability to just stop binge eating or whatever habit or action pattern there might be, especially if it's coming all the way from childhood and it's been happening over and over for years, maybe decades. But in each moment, the power of our consciousness to influence internal affairs is infinite. So we don't have to look at the supposed illusion of time, because we are only ever in the power of this now moment, this moment, this moment. Now it's this moment. Now it's this moment. Do you see what's happening? When we're focused on now, we're transcending the conceptualization of time by being always present. That amplifies our power. By being fully submersed in the power of each new present moment, we are transcending the conceptualizations of time to embody infinite power and deconstruct illusions. And then healing happens in a deeper way than ever before. And what might have taken 20 years to heal could then happen in 3 years. But to get to the space where we're healing rapidly, we have to let go of the conceptualization of time. It's almost paradoxical. When we look at time, we lose our power. But when we look away from time, we have more power, but then time is on our side. Okay? So in this process, as the adult self connects with the inner child, or the observational self connects with the experiential self, consciousness rallies so that even if a different choice cannot be made in the immediacy of the moment, power is being reclaimed. And then continually practicing that, eventually consciousness will have so much power that it can choose something else. And then when you go to binge eat, maybe you eat slower. Maybe you can't totally stop yourself from eating altogether, but maybe you can be more present while you're eating. Being fully present with each moment as you binge eat is a step towards healing, because every second of loving presence is helping to rewire the underlying neural structures, provoking those automated styles of experience. Binge eating is something that comes from unconscious implicit procedural memory sculpted during past moments of unfulfilled attachment needs. But if we can start to be present while we're binge eating, that is a first step to healing the binge eating. You don't heal binge eating by just stopping the binge eating. You heal it by helping to heal the neural wiring, creating action patterns that you do not find to be aligned with your healthiest, highest, happiest version of yourself. And so if you can be completely present with each moment as you binge eat, that is a step towards healing. The action is a catalyst for healing if consciousness comes together during the experience. The automated action pattern can be a catalyst for healing if consciousness comes together during the experience. So a lot of times when there's something like binge eating, it's some aspects of ourselves experiencing this one region of neural data that's holding these stress responses and action patterns because of past moments of unfulfilled attachment needs. But all of that is happening beyond awareness that we don't directly know about. So all we see is the binge eating. But that is only ever a clue about what's actually happening beneath the surface. And so when consciousness comes together with loving presence within itself in the moment, then no matter what the action pattern is, there's more power of consciousness to interject itself and transmute neural wiring to ignite personal power reclamation in any type of personal experience. So when the adult self can notice action patterns stemming from early neurodevelopment and interject loving presence with the inner child, then action patterns can actually be a catalyst for healing. If you're approaching sugary foods and you know that that action pattern comes from your inner child, because during childhood you liked to eat sugary foods a lot and it was something that you were always eating, then the adult self can come in and eat that sugary food as an intention or with an intention of connecting with the inner child. Even though the action pattern isn't changing, it's a catalyst for inner healing and connection. And then the more that the adult self connects with the inner child, the more that consciousness can rally to transmute procedural memory data so that it holds new action patterns that the consciousness can choose.